This is work by 4 of us. Only 2 of us can be here tonight. Werner had to go and take care of his kids, like David in the picture that you saw before the board. And John Wafer's in Ireland and just couldn't get it together to schlep over. So you've got Todd and me. I'm going to do a few framing slides, then Todd's going to tell you what we did, and I'm going to tell you what happened next. So this is us, our group, which has been in this building seemingly forever, for certainly a long time. And as you can see, we are an interdisciplinary research group, part of IBM Research, technically part of IBM Watson Research. We are the satellite location of Watson. When Irene Greif founded this group, she said it's interdisciplinary, and in fact, one of the job tests is, are you okay with that? And if you aren't, then we try to find you something else to do. So those people don't work in silos, they work together. And this project is actually an example of that, since we brought talents from diverse sources into the work that this talk is about. I'm not going to read this to you, which is good news. In the beginning, we were Lotus Research, part of Lotus Software. Actually, it was a title before that, but that's pretty good. And we worked on a bunch of collaborative things. Lotus, there are good days and bad days, and Lotus had a bad day, and IBM came along and rescued it, which was lovely. And then for a while, we were doing the collaborative user experience group, trying to put together the computer science, the social science, and the design into a single title. And things changed, and we became the Center for Social Business, focused more, aligned better with parts of IBM that were doing that work, in part because our group showed them how. And I'm not going to go any more of this stuff. And now we're part of Symbiotic Cognitive Systems, as IBM has done a major reorganization of research. Excuse me. And so now we're still in the business of people and computers and helping people to work with one another through computers. But now the computers are intended to be a whole lot smarter and a whole lot interesting than they were before. So that's us. We're on the 2nd floor of this building. We love visitors, especially if you come with a story to tell. So keep that in mind. And I think now I sit down and Todd tells you what we did.
All right. Thank you, Michael. So, presumably everyone here is familiar with crowdfunding, how it works on the internet. It's gained in popularity immensely over the past few years. There are more than 200 sites, and I'm sure that that's a stale figure at this point. I'm sure there are many more. And it's not just for raising funding for small toy projects. As you can see, there's serious money at stake. Projects can be as big as or larger than $10 million. And I'm sure you're familiar with the more popular sites like Kickstarter, Indiegogo. And it's been the basis for publicity and even legislation. There was the Jobs Act passed a couple years ago that makes it easier from a securities regulation standpoint to do crowdfunding. And so what we wanted to do was figure out how would crowdfunding work within the enterprise? And so, well, let's do a quick comparison of how crowdfunding works on the internet versus within, how would it work within an enterprise. So the social model is very similar. They both, the types of roles for people who use the crowdfunding applications. You have proposers, people who propose projects, and you have the people who back them. With our enterprise crowdfunding application that we built, we also added the roles of some additional roles like volunteers. You could volunteer to help work on a project. And then there were other smaller ones like people who followed projects and commented on them. Proposals, both on the internet and within an enterprise, are similar. One difference would be that you're more likely to see a video on the internet for when a project proposer explains their project, whereas we discovered that we allowed people to use videos, but they were more likely than not to just use an image because it was easier. The biggest difference for how crowdfunding works in the two models has to do with the economics. Now, on the internet, you're spending your own money, and the only limit is how deep your pockets are. And especially with sites like Kickstarter, projects can even be overfunded. With ours, we made the decision, first of all, that projects couldn't be overfunded. They stopped when they met their funding match, and that just simplified things. But also, I'd say the biggest difference is you're not spending your own money. Executives will allocate a certain amount of their budget for people within their departments to use in a crowdfunding site, or in a round, rather. So the budget is explicitly limited. Another big difference is on the internet, there are ongoing opportunities for you to pitch your project and to get funding. With ours, we had very delimited 1-month campaigns. There was 1 month during which you could pitch your project, and 1 month for it. And during that same month, it would have to get funded. And if it didn't get its funding by the end of the month, that was it. So the main questions we wanted to ask were, could enterprise crowdfunding, could it lead to impactful projects? Could these projects then become seeds for something even larger? Could it engage employees and connect employees across geographies and disciplines? Could it be a new model for how budgets are allocated? You could imagine very forward-thinking executives setting aside a little bit of their budgets for the wisdom of the crowd to decide what to do with them. And at a higher level, could it transform IBM culture? So we built it. We tried it out. Our application was called 1x5, 1x5. Our initial grand idea for what this would be was that everyone in the company would get the value of 1 share of IBM stock, which was, at the time was $200-ish, and 5 days of their time to devote to projects on these crowdfunding sites. That was our grand vision. We started small, though. So we built an application. We tried it out within software research, and that contained at the time about 500 people, most of whom were located in New York, some of us here in Cambridge. And the executive who sanctioned this allocated $50,000 of his budget. So that turned out to be $100 per person that they were able to spend on the site. And we allowed 30 days for proposals and funding. So I'm going to give you just a very quick tour of how the site worked. This is, when you would come to it, you could see we borrowed somewhat heavily from Kickstarter's design. But this is the Discover page. This is where you could view all the projects. You could sort by them. When project creators would create a project, they would choose a category for it. So you can sort by, if you just want to see equipment projects or events, software, other, travel, speakers. And then once you dig down into a project, this is what the top half looks like. As I said, most people would put an image up. And then there would be on the right-hand side the funding goal and how much money had actually been pledged to it. This is an example of a project that someone from Cambridge wanted to do a visualization workshop. And unfortunately, it didn't get funded, but this is just a good example. And you can see how many people have backed it. And then if you scroll down, you can see more information about the project, how their person intends to use the funds. And also this part, which is different than traditional internet crowdfunding, which is that we had volunteers. So the project creator could put out what they, put out a request for what they would like, and then people could sign up and talk about what they would be willing to provide. We also, borrowing from the Kickstarter model, allowed people to specify rewards. So if you pledge a certain amount, you could have a copy of whatever we're making. You pledge more money, you'll get your name in the acknowledgments or something. And we actually found out that some people used this in the first trial, but really it did not play nearly as big a role as it does in internet crowdfunding, which doesn't surprise me too much. So you can also see the number of backers, the people who have pledged money over time, and how far or close the funding is from its target, which is the green line at the top. And we even show you who has pledged and how much they pledged. So it's very open. Same thing with the volunteers. And then the project creators could issue updates and it would email anyone who had followed the project or backed it or volunteered, just saying how the project's going, remind people to tell their friends about it, that sort of thing. And this is the page where you would actually create the project. There are a number of different tabs. I won't go through them. It's very standard. You just say what category your project belonged to, describe how you're going to use the money, upload an image or a link to a video, and most importantly, specify how much funding you need. So let's see. This is the weekly newsletter we sent out. And I bring this up because it actually turned out to be very important in terms of participation rates. So every week we would draft this, this email, and it would tell people how many days were left to fund projects, and it would talk about what happened last week, and we'd highlight some projects of the week. And actually, if you looked at a graph of funding over time, you would see huge spikes every Monday morning when these emails would go out. So they turn out to be more important than I would have guessed. Yeah, sure.
Please use the microphone.
So was this all within the group of 500, or were there other people outside of that group who were participating in some way?
Very good question. So I should have been clear on that. So these 500 people within software research were allowed to, they could do everything. They could propose projects, and they each had $100 to put down, or they could volunteer. But anyone from the company could come to the site. They could follow the projects. They could poke around. They could even volunteer if they wanted to, although I don't think we had any instances of that. But they couldn't put down any money on projects. So we had 3 types of trials. The software research one in Cambridge and New York that I've been talking about was our first one. And then at the beginning of 2013, we ran 2 trials, one in our Almaden, our West Coast lab in San Jose. And there were 2 trials have been run in our CIO's office. And they are distributed geographically, unlike the other 2 trials. And so this is just a quick comparison of what differed among the different trials. So for instance, in software research, the first trial we did, any type of project could be pitched, and any type of project was pitched. They varied all across the spectrum, from real technology projects to events to things we'll call morale boosters. I'm sure Mike will get to that later. Almaden, people could pitch any type of project, but they were more encouraged to pitch technical ones. And then the CIO's office was at the other extreme. They were told, they were mandated, you have to pitch software business-related projects. The software trial and the CIO trial, if you reached your funding goal, your project was green-lighted. It was all good. With the Almaden one, you actually had to have a volunteer goal too, and that had to be met. So that changed that dynamic a little bit. The amounts of money were different. The first trial was about $100 per backer. The Almaden one was $500 per backer. And then the CIO's office, you'll notice it had the same budget as the Almaden and nearly the same number of people, but each person had much more money to spend. And there was a cutoff. So as soon as that budget had been exhausted, the site shut down. You're not allowed to pledge anymore. And also with the CIO's office, there was a mandated minimum and maximum of your funding goals, because they wanted real big projects. So there had to be a $10,000 minimum and a $50,000 maximum, whereas there's a wide range with the other 2 trials. The CIO one also allowed people to propose multiple projects, whereas the other 2 trials, you were only allowed to propose one. And another final big difference was that the first trial, it's sort of on your own time. If your project gets funded, you're responsible for making it happen on top of your day job. No staff is provided. You just have to sort of find the time to do it. Almaden was a little bit more than that. The time was sanctioned, but you still had a day job. CIO's office was more of the extreme of they actually provided the time and the staff for you to do your project if it got funded. So you can see there's a wide range of parameters for the 3 different projects, which allowed us to compare and contrast the results. Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, just quick. So it's not clear to me what the money is for. I mean, is the money? I mean, those are very small amounts of money if they were to include, your loaded salaries. So
they don't include your salaries.
that's the bottom line there, whether it's set staff time was included or not.
Oh yes. Sorry. Let me be more clear on that. No, that money was just for whatever you would need to buy in order to make your project happen. It did not include your baseline salary or anything like that. Otherwise, the numbers would have been much, much larger. So this is an architecture slide, a bizarre one. I'll go through it very quickly. The point I wanted to make with this is that we used some non-traditional, at the time, it's becoming more traditional now, technologies to build our crowdfunding application, which enabled us to do it within 8 or 10 weeks, whereas it would have taken much longer otherwise. In particular, we built a Node.js, this is for the technical people out there, a Node.js application. We used a NoSQL database called MongoDB. And very importantly, we used a UI framework provided by Twitter called Twitter Bootstrap. And along with something called Jade, which enables you to write HTML templates very easily. And all of this combined to allow us, even given the time needed to learn these new technologies, it allowed the developers to create the application very quickly. And with that, I think I'll hand it off to Mike.
Thank you. So as one of Todd's slides said, we built it, we tried it out, and now there's sort of chapter 1 and chapter 2 of what happened. As you can see, it says executive at the top, so this is what we do for our short talks. It turns out to be a fairly good way of organizing a longer talk. We were surprised at how well this turned out, and people who know me know I'm very self-critical, so we were really surprised at how well it turned out. People participated much more than we expected. We patted ourselves on the heads in our trial, and then all the other trials did better than we did. We had consistently high collaboration rates across boundaries, and in fact, chapter 2 of the how it turned out is exactly about that topic. People were very creative. As you will see, we'll show you a bunch of examples of things. And why do we think oh, but you have a question, so please.
Yeah, I have a question. Some of the outside the crowdfunding projects normally get funded, and then sometimes their expectations get more than what they initially thought was needed. Did any of your projects run into that, where like the scope of the project got much bigger after funding was?
Good question. Sometimes there was scope creep, which was unfortunate for the person because we didn't allow the budget to creep. Our theory in this was we wanted as many things to be successful as possible. And therefore, as soon as a project met its goal, we capped it. Not saying that's the right decision, it was the way we did it, given that we were trying to maximize the success of the innovators. Other people would do it differently, and I'm not prescribing or proscribing anything up here. So why do we think it worked out so well? We'd had lots of experiments with brainstorming in IBM. Some of you know about the IBM Innovation Jam that we run company-wide every 2 years for up to 400,000 people. This was smaller. We've also have a number of voting kinds of innovation projects in which people propose ideas and people say yes, no. This one seemed to get more attention. And why was that? And we think maybe it's because real dollars are, well, concrete. And mostly what people were doing was changing their workplace, changing their work culture, changing the things they got to do, enabling research projects that they wouldn't otherwise have been able to do. And we'll do more on that soon. And so, and it was also a voice of the employee. And some of the management were particularly interested to hear what the employees wanted. And you have a question.
Like the way that the internet crowdfunding works, was there any motivation that they spend the money on the more successful project? What is the motivation behind the users that I need to spend their dollars on the right place?
Why did people spend the money? I'll get to that in a little while. I think I deleted that slide, so I'll get to it now. The motivation for spending the money varied by organization and varied by individual. One person said, I use naked self-interest as my funding philosophy, meaning if it would be good for my research, I'll fund it. And we saw that happen with access to resources that we hadn't had access to before. I saw research papers go by that were enabled by some of the projects on this. So that's one answer. But there was another person who said when we did post-trial interviews, Michael, you should look at this. There's community things happening here. There are things here that will help all of us. And so there's a big range of motivations. Remember, these are things that are done inside the corporation within in a sense, communities that are formed by organizations. We'll have more to say about that. And so people were spending money on each other as well as on themselves. And they were spending money on their shared, whatever it is that we share in an organization. Shared culture, shared resources. So it's a little different from the internet model. Actually, we think maybe it's a lot different from the internet model. And so I'm just going to whip through the rest of this slide. Values, as we thought of them about a year ago, were bringing more diverse knowledge for making smarter decisions. The wisdom of the crowd actually seems to operate here, and we'll show you some examples. And then some people said to us, oh, well, maybe you think that's an innovation project. We think it's an engagement project. You're engaging the workforce. That's the major thing. And sure enough, that was happening too. And so we're still a business, even though this is a very sort of lovely community-oriented application. And so we wanted to be more competitive. We wanted to build the right things with the right kind of intelligence, and we think something of that happened too. So now we'll go through some of the results. This fountain is, on the left-hand side, it's the growth of people who participated. On the right-hand side, it's the growth of money that was spent in our first trial. And you can see bumps appearing periodically, about 4 of those bumps. Those are the Mondays that Todd was talking about when his newsletter went out and people jumped into the application. The little stars are when things get funded. Not everything got funded. And then we've put some profiles of projects out on the edge. This is, and I'm sorry. Yes, and I think I'll just stop there on this and keep on moving. So here's high-level views of what happened. All of these run across the month of our first trial, from the beginning to the end of that month. And so the proportionate graph at the top is the numbers of people who are in each role. People selected their role. So you might go and view. You're clearly a viewer at that point, but you might not do anything else. You stay a viewer. But you might invest, or in the bottom line, you might propose a project. And so what we saw was conversions. We saw viewers becoming more engaged and participating by investing, which was, of course, exactly what we wanted to see. And as you can see from that top illustration, it happened a whole lot. The bottom is the way that we spent the money, and the pink line is the amount of money that was pledged, but in order for the money to be committed, you have to meet your funding target. So the yellow line is the actual amount of money that was funded, that was committed into projects. So we spent, as you can see, rather less than half of our intended budget. And the executive, Dave McQueenie, who funded this, had to take that money back. He didn't want to, but those were the rules, so that's what happened. And that set up the expectations of some of the other trials, which is why the CIO vastly over-budgeted how much people could spend, because they didn't want to make the same mistake we had done. We had 46% of the people who could participate did participate. As I said, we were pretty excited about this because the standard sort of internet figures, Jacob Nielsen's figures, the 1-9-90 rule, you'd expect about 10% of the people to participate. So this made us pretty excited. And we also had some internal data from the most active online communities in our online communities service, which has, I think, several 100,000 communities in it now. We looked at the top 188% of them, and that was only 13% participation. So something different was happening. The success rate was pretty similar to Kickstarter. The money spent, we've already covered that. We didn't even get pledged half the money, and we spent rather less than that. But people did participate in interesting ways. Here, we've done this with each of those clusters is a different direct report to the executive. So he's a vice president, these are department heads. And here we're looking at one of the projects, which was a proposal to purchase a 3D printer. Nobody knew quite what that would be used for. It wasn't part of anybody's research agenda, but people came out of the woodwork saying, yes, I could use that. For computational optics, I could use that. For packaging sensors, I could use that. It was very exciting. And so you might think then that people would fund that only if they were in the same sub-organization as the person who proposed it, and the answer is no, not at all. Look at that. There's more than 7 organizations involved in that, and that's the average figure for a proposal. I'm not cherry picking. We sent out a quick social network survey to the people who made the proposals. We said, well, that's so nice to see in the middle of a talk. I'll have to. We said, please describe your relationship with each of the people who has supported your project. And 42% of the investors were unknown to the proposer. So So people were supporting on content, not on social relationships. Social relationships too, but a whole lot on content, which excited us. In the CIO trial, the third one that Todd mentioned, that one was distributed over multiple countries. And again, we saw lots and lots of collaboration across boundaries, in this case across national boundaries. And also in this case, it turned out that we used the same social networking survey, and 70% of the investors were unknown to the people they supported the projects of. So this made us very exciting. So, so those are numbers. Here's a question.
Were the projects originally unknown to the participants until like the moment that you went live, or? Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
All of this happened very, very quickly. If you look at the research of Liz Gerber and her students, Julie Hood just gave a spectacular talk at CSCW that got an award. The preparation time for pitching on Kickstarter, Indiegogo, Rocket Hub, places like that, is at least measured in months and perhaps even in years. Here, we said, here's your opportunity. It's going to happen next week. Go. And so everything was bright, shiny, new. And that also explains why there weren't elaborate videos. That people didn't have time to make them. So here's some examples of projects. So for example, the first, let's see, does the cursor work? Maybe yes, maybe no. There's the 3D printer. And here was a social robot, a telepresence robot that was proposed. We had some satellite members who were not physically present in any of our work locations. And so the notion here was they could be more than a voice on the telephone. In fact, optimally, they could roll their telepresence robot around on the floor and come and visit people in their offices. Not a new idea, but one that we'd never built in Watson. People also addressed things that would get people together in order to talk with each other. So beverages at a certain time in the afternoon, and disc golf, which is hard to play by yourself. And the point of this, we had to close a building and people were being moved to another building. And so some of these were welcome projects. Some of these were saying, in effect, you're here, you don't know anybody, we can fix that. Come and play disc golf. So one person said morale matters. And we think, yes, morale does matter. And people expressed that very much. People were also very innovative. So we love these two examples. There are others as well. And in this case, I am cherry picking the two that make me smile the most. And some of you are smiling, so thank you. The people who are proposing the 3D printer put up leaflets next to the regular standard printers saying, don't you wish you were printing on a 3D printer right now? And they got funded. In the Almaden trial, the second one, the people who were proposing yet another telepresence robot borrowed a telepresence robot, and the robot went up and down the hallways and campaigned for the project. And you know how that sentence ends. They got funded. Most of the clever things lead to, and they got funded. So why were we so successful? We think it's because we time-boxed the event. We got people's attention on it. At the Almaden location, they in fact had a site-wide meeting, and for those of you who've been to ACM-style conferences, you've seen the 1-minute madness of the 30-second madness. Each person gets up, gets to say about half of what they want to say about their project, and then they run out of time and they're taken off the stage. So the Almaden site did that. It was a 2-minute madness, and each proposer got those 2 minutes to pitch their stuff. Top-down support helps a lot in a working organization, and so it was great to have an executive who was willing to provide the money and willing to sign the email, whether the executive wrote the email or not, willing to sign the email that encouraged people to participate. And Todd's newsletters, his weekly newsletters, were, as I've shown you now in the data, a big part of it. The voice of the employee was important. People said this would give everyone a chance to enable what they want. And, oh, there's the naked self-interest quotation. Looks like I kept the slide after all. I backed things I need to do my research. I wanted to make a statement that I need these resources, haven't been able to have them, and people's research got better as a result. And the crowd made decisions very clearly. So the green boxed stuff were 2 projects that were successful, and successful pretty quickly. One of them was a workshop, and the other was actually sort of what this group is doing, putting talks online so that other people can get to it. The yellow box stuff didn't make it, but looked like it was trending in that direction, and maybe if we'd had a bit more time and a few more people, that would have happened. And we had some real dogs, and the red boxed projects were ones that never got off the ground. The crowd said, nope, That's not in everybody's interest. We're not so interested. So very clear decision-making happened. New concepts, I won't say new IP, but new things that we hadn't had, new ways of getting tangible things that we could think with, like the printer, like the robot. And I'm not going to do all of these, but some of them, again, were very, come on, pointer, very, very social, about exchange among members of a research community, as well as tools. And also a bunch of things that focused on what customers need and how we could meet those needs better. And I could read a lot of text to you, but maybe I won't do too much of that because I've said most of this already. So here's chapter 2. And here the question was, if there's something that might get in the way of collaborating, of investing in somebody else's project, could people get past that? So for this, we looked at the CIO, which was, I should say clearly, not a research organization. It's part of IT's large IT infrastructure. So these are people who are clocked. You know, they work hard for a living. They are supervised. They have projects that must be done on time with a deadline. And research, we have those too, but we also are allowed to whine and sometimes extend the deadline. They don't. They have to do it on time, within budget, and they are tracked very carefully on that. And so this organization was 5,500 people in 21 countries, actually more than that, but these are the participation figures. 21 countries, 15 very, very large teams, international working groups, and in 24 divisions or formal parts of the company inside of CIO. And they build software, and part of their mission is to foster innovation with the other people. In fact, they think they're the main innovators in research, and in IBM, and we researchers, well, you know, we think we're the innovators, but they know they're the real innovators. So they're a good group to work with, and they challenge us every day, and it's very nice. And so in this case, we could look at a fairly famous hypothesis from HCI and CSCW called distance matters. This hypothesis comes from the work of Judy and Gary Olson, whom some of you know as being amazingly productive, wonderful researchers. And they looked at what happens when working groups are in different places for synchronous work. And the answer is it gets harder. Other people then, inspired by them, revisited some of the older literature, conducted new studies for asynchronous research as well. And so distance is an obstacle. I mean, you all knew that anyway. They formalized it in a way that was very, very clear. And people have proposed lots of reasons for that, and I've listed a few here. It's harder to communicate. The quality of the communication goes down. There's more stress, especially time zone stress. It's more effortful to reach people and share things. And Bob Kraut and colleagues and some other folks have also looked at what happens to spontaneous collaborations, and 50 meters is enough to make that a whole lot harder to happen. So we've all believed, including this part of we, right here, Michael, that distance was the problem. But what if it's a special case of something broader? And so for that way of thinking, we turn to two highly related theories, homophily theory and social identity theory. Homophily theory comes from the old, I think this probably goes back to Aesop and before, birds of a feather flock together. If we're like one another, we'll do stuff together, which some people call the attraction paradigm or the way that we categorize ourselves. And it's been shown to operate in social media as well, like wikis and blogs. Social identity theory is an old theory recently revived for CSCW and HCI. By Farnham and Churchill, and they subdivided that. They were writing a critique of holistic unitary models of identity, and they said identity occurs in facets, and I might have a strong facet in common with Todd, but I might have another strong facet in common, which Todd doesn't share in with someone else, and Todd's life is just as complicated as mine. So in their view then, if we share a social identity facet, if we share ways that we describe ourselves, we're more likely to collaborate. Up at the top of the slide, if we are more similar to one another, we're more likely to collaborate. And these sorts of theories have been manifested very, very clearly in the things at the bottom of the slide that I'm not going to read to you. So very robust phenomenon. So we'll use the language from Farnham and Churchill of faceted identity for the next part of the talk. And so we used those theories to re-examine the impact of distance. Olson and Olson told us distance matters more than anything else. But we could also look at distance, but we could also look at the organization identity, the division, the formal organizational structure that people were in, and also their working groups, their teams. And those we thought of as three different facets. And so, being good researchers, we made our research hypotheses. First one was you'll be more likely to invest in someone's project if you share a country. Second one was you'll be more likely to invest in someone's project if you share a working group or a team. And the third one was you'll be more likely to invest in a project if you share the same formal organizational division. We also looked at social ties theory, and we thought you'd be more likely to invest if you knew the person you were investing in, although, as you know, we already found some evidence against that. So we had activity logs. Todd built the software so that we recorded just about everything that happened. And it came out in a way that someone like me could analyze, so I was very grateful. We also rated the online employee database for organizational demographics, who works for whom, what is their, what's their division, et cetera. The CIO shared with us their lists of large working groups or international teams. And we also did a similar social networking survey to the proposers to find out about their investors. And so first look at the data says, well, people do seem to be collaborating very nicely across country differences. Lots and lots of people are willing to collaborate, 65%, in fact, across international boundaries. 72% are willing to collaborate across working team boundaries, and 60% are willing to collaborate across divisional boundaries. So number one, that's really good news. Number two, that's not a test of our hypotheses yet, because we had different numbers of people in all these categories, so we had to compute the expected frequency of collaborations and then see if our obtained frequencies of collaborations were different. And I'm up here talking like that, so you know I'm going to say they were. So here, come on, pointer. Here, 100% is the null hypothesis. That's the expected frequency of country-to-country collaborations. And as you can see, people who are in the same country were much more likely to collaborate than people who are in different countries. Well, so distance matters. But working group matters too, and in just about the same fashion. People who are in the same working group were significantly more likely to collaborate, to fund one another. And it was a little less likely if you were in different working groups. Maybe distance doesn't matter quite as much as we thought. Well, organization matters too then, because the division effect was just like the other two, quite strong, statistically significant, lots of zeros after the P sign. And so we confirmed all three of our research hypotheses. That is, distance matters. You're more likely to collaborate, invest if you're in the same country, but also working group matters, maybe that's familiarity, and division matters, maybe that's just the description on an org chart, but it seems to matter. And they seem to matter in mostly the same way, which is interesting. So then we looked at the two-way interactions of those effects. And we found, and I'm going to make this, short, Michael. There were significant interactions, and they were super additive. If you have two things in common, that really boosts your likelihood of investing, more than the sum of each of the factors by itself. The three-way interaction, not so much. That one wasn't as clear. But so we're finding then similar kinds of things in distance and in other identity facets. We also did the social ties study. And you already heard the result of that. 70% of the investors were unknown to the proposers, so you don't have to know someone to collaborate with them. Content is worth it. And so here's a summary of what we found. And you've already heard me say this just a moment ago, so I'm going to go real fast on this slide. Distance matters. Yes, you're more likely to collaborate if you're in the same country, but working group matters and pretty much in the same pattern. And organizational division matters pretty much in the same pattern. And social ties don't matter so much. The bottom of the slide is the required modesty. It was just IBM. It's a real big place, but it's just one great big place. So we don't know if it would generalize. But we did do it in several different styles of organization, in research and out. And so this is no longer a precious little project in which the vice president says, well, I like this thing to happen, and Todd and Michael are very nice people, and so is Werner. So maybe you should do it. This does seem to have nice legs and keep on going all by itself. So there are limitations, but we're optimistic. And so what would this tell us about theory? Well, we started off saying distance matters, and now it begins to look like difference matters because of the other two things that behave like distance, but really its differences matter together, and in some ways matter more if you've got more differences. The superadditive effect that I mentioned before. So we then look to our betters who have done more research than we have. And we see that Zhang and Carroll had a model in which social networking leads to social ties, and that leads to social capital, and the likelihood, social capital being defined as the likelihood of helping one another. And of course, we saw that that didn't happen. We had that 70% of people who were unknown to the proposers. Maybe the investment, maybe the social capital happens before the social ties happen, sometimes. So that one needs to get looked at some more. Well, I just did that whole bullet, didn't I? And we certainly saw powerful effects of homophily theory and or social identity theory. So then we begin to wonder, well, what other differences would matter to people? And if people were co-located, remember this second study was in the radically distributed group. If people were co-located, would those factors be as strong? Open question, we don't know. And then how can we be more computational about this and make some stronger predictions? For design, we think we know something. So for individuals, we could go from serendipity. Well, you look around the website. Maybe you do so because the executive tells you to do so. Maybe because your friend says, I got something there. Maybe because, look, you've got $100 or $2,000 burning a hole in your pocket, and you have to spend it by Friday. So that's what happens now, but we could easily build recommendation engines. And one of the things they could look at is identity facets in common. So that's one way that this could go for individuals. For organizations, we might want to look with proper privacy protections, of course, so only aggregated data. We might want to look at the kinds of commonalities that are getting people together. Maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing. Organizations would know more than they know now. They might want to adjust that. They might want to tune the kinds of commonalities that they make salient to people. And we think these lessons could be moved to internet crowdfunding sites just as easily, although the profiling problems would be a little bit more challenging there. So you've already seen this. This is the summary one. We had really good results, stronger than we expected, and then we turned out to be the weakest case, our trial, and the other trials had more participation and a whole lot of other moreness happening there. Very high collaboration across boundaries, both organizational boundaries and geographical boundaries, and creative projects. We've reviewed most of this already. Employees were able to change their workplace, were able to change the kind of resources they had available to them. In the CIO, people were able to do small to moderate changes in their career. If you propose a project, it gets funded, then you're the project lead, and you get staff, and you get time to do it, and your career just took off in a very, very nice way. So people were able to make differences for their communities and for themselves, and all of this seemed to work together. And people are also able to say what they needed in a way that management either could hear, could act upon, or at least could support once they had gotten the support of their peers. And I've certainly talked about the potential value enough, so let's go back to Todd's slide for a minute. As Todd pointed out, things work differently. In the first trial, we were playing with peanuts, as it were, a mere $100 per person. This was liberatory when we began to do it. We were so excited. And yet, the other sites had much larger budgets. CIO had $2,000 per person. In our original site, you could propose any kind of project you wanted, and the vice president would smile and say, that's a new idea, that's great. By the time we get to CIO, it's software only, and it has to be in the medium-sized project category. No tiny little things that would make life better, make this worth our effort to fund and manage. And the time available to do the projects was highly variable. In research, you managed your time on a background project, just like we all in research do that all the time, every day anyway. And so things had the lowest priority there. Again, by contrast, in CIO, it could be a career-changing thing. And the good news is it worked in all three cases. And it worked pretty similarly in all three cases. So it seems very robust. It seems you can do it in research and not in research. You can do it for small amounts, for medium amounts of money. You can do it for projects that are structured and restricted in different ways. And we keep on looking for a downside. We keep on looking for damage that we've caused, and we haven't found any. And again, I'm a pretty self-critical person, so I was looking hard. It's almost like the physician's oath, do no harm, first do no harm. So we worried that we were doing harm, and we couldn't find any evidence that we were doing harm. So this was very, very nice, I think. And so as you can see, I have a conclusion slide, which is good because there's dessert. And so benefits, it's grassroots innovation. Ideas come from the crowd, and ideas are vetted by the crowd. And it's different from standard top-down things that happen not only in IBM, but in most of the companies that you all are from, and most of the nonprofits that some of you are from, and most of the government organizations that some of you are from. It's a different way to make organizational decisions. And it speaks to not only innovation in the technical sense, but also culture and morale and the ability of a community to do things that help its members. And it engages employees, and it helps people to see value in one another and value in their own ideas. Leads to good research outcomes. We were real happy that we got to publish some of the stuff. Helps us to think differently about collaboration, willingness, and readiness, and to look at some of the technical and cultural factors that could feed that. And also, of course, so the bread and butter for our group, we made a mediation structure that helped people to do investment and help people to find community and help people to find common cause. And that's a good thing to be able to do, and now we know more about that. And we got to test some theories that have been around for decades and have been very influential. As I claimed, it seems quite robust. In fact, I should have said that the CIO organization took a copy of the code. We forked the code. They ran their own trial on their own code with Todd certainly giving support. But the project is transferred. And in fact, CIO likes it so much, they're still doing it. Todd is still giving very, very occasional consultation on software. I'm still giving occasional consultation on numbers. And they own it, and their vice presidents are getting credit for it now in the press. And that's great news, because it means we transferred it. We have a client who liked it so much, they want to claim it for themselves. So very robust and transferable. And so, look, we're doing something different. We know about jams, we know about forums, they provide input to the executives who make decisions. This is different. This is the crowd deciding and the executives saying, we trust our crowd, we want good things to happen, and they thank the crowd, and we thank you. And since you run the place, I think we should start here.
Yeah. Okay, I have two questions. I'll ask one and then get in the back of the line for the second.
Thank
The
you.
first is it was very successful by a lot of criteria in terms of participation and all kinds of things, but I didn't hear the kind of perhaps most critical to an executive who wants to run this out answer, which is, were these projects that were funded and took place actually, did they do IBM any good? I mean, were they good projects? Did they make us money? Did they make us a better company?
Right.
Or was it just improving morale because people enjoyed doing it?
Well, first of all, improving morale makes a place a better company.
That's true.
I just needed to say that. I feel better now, so thank you, everyone. Although I do believe it very, very firmly. In the CIO trial, we did our post-trial interviews, as social scientists would do. Every single person we interviewed knew who was going to benefit from that project. Sometimes it was other people in CIO because we've had this problem and this will fix it. Sometimes it was clients in IBM. Sometimes it was clients in customer companies. So there was a business case for everything that CIO did, and to a lesser extent in the two research trials. So now, did we follow through and say how much money did we make on this? No. We have followed through and said how many publications have we seen, nothing formal, but have we seen publications based on new capabilities that would not have been there without the crowdfunding trial? And the answer is yes, we have. And so we helped on, I'm going to make my case again, helped on research because we were publishing stuff we couldn't publish otherwise. Helped on organizational culture, and helped on meeting the needs of clients. So in my modest way, I call this a good day.
And one would expect then that the percentage of the budgets of the executives they would increase the percentage of their budget that would go to this. Is that any indication that that's happening?
Yes, but I can't tell you any details. This would be in the CIO, and it's their announcement to make and not mine, and so I'm not going to make it. But long conversations about how to make things bigger and more effective. Yes. Now, will that happen? Stay tuned.
So I have two questions. Maybe they're yes/no questions. But the first was there any kind of oversight about to make a project proposal, or could anyone propose really anything, or did someone have to like stamp it approved to get that? And then the second thing was, was there expected completion dates or delivery dates for each of the projects?
So on your first question, well, that would depend on the trial. For the first trial, we set it up. First of all, so no, you cannot just go on the site and publish a project by yourself. It does need to be approved, but the approval process for the first project was very laissez-faire. We wouldn't outright reject projects unless they were completely outside the bounds. And what we'd normally do is provide some feedback and advice. Maybe a goal of $50,000 for your project when the entire budget is $50,000 is not a reasonable goal. So that kind of advice, and then we would stamp them through. Almaden, so that was for the first trial. For the second one, there was a review board out in San Jose who would review the projects. I'm not entirely sure, how many they had to reject.
Not very many.
But not very many. It was mostly just making sure everything was all right.
And in CIO, there was a stronger review process, in part because there was more money involved, and that's an organization that is careful about that kind of thing. And so the major thing that they did was to make sure they had novelty. Not intellectual property novelty necessarily, although I think some of that was happening there. But if it's a relatively new person, they may be proposing something that already didn't work 2 years ago. So they did that kind of scan. It was, generally speaking, supportive rather than restrictive. Not in all cases, I'm sure, but the spirit of it was, how do we make this stronger?
Also, the review process, just to be clear, also always took place at the beginning. It wasn't the case that a project would get funded and then we'd say, oh, too bad, you're not going to get money. So
there was a part two, and the part two was time frame. And CIO managed their projects real hard. That's what they do. In fact, John Wafer, the fourth author of this presentation, the one in Ireland, is a project manager in CIO, and the CIO project happened mostly because he managed it very, very well. And road herd on me. I am not such a good project manager. In research, some of the projects, frankly, didn't get done. People looked at their priorities, people looked at what their clients needed and said, okay, this is just going to have to fall by the wayside because client work is more important, period. Good decisions, sometimes sad, but good.
there were also organizational changes that,
yes.
That mixed things up a little bit. So
you said that when you sent out your newsletter, it drove traffic to the site. Did you mention just a few projects in the newsletter, or all of them? Or
we would highlight a few projects in the newsletter, but it was not just those few projects that saw the increase,
Yeah.
I believe.
Yes.
So that was the question, whether it was like a most emailed list in the newspaper, which just sort of feeds on itself, or whether it was driving traffic to all the projects.
No, and in fact, we would be careful not to put into the newsletter the most popular projects. We chose some, there wasn't a whole lot of method to the madness, but we would choose some that had some funding, but looked like they could be on track if they got more traffic, and those are the types of projects that we generally feature.
How many were there altogether?
The first trial, I think there were 30, is it 36 successfully funded or 36 pitched?
Rats, I believe it was 36 successfully funded out of roughly 44.
Okay.
Almaden had a somewhat smaller number. CIO had a smaller number but higher value, at least by the money.
Thanks.
Good, please.
Hi. My question to you is, the intention is to toss a wrench in what you did.
Please, I would love that.
So, in general terms, the universe of people that were involved in a project were all IBMers.
Yes.
So there is, let's say, homogeneity of purpose. So perhaps the big kudos in your project is for the people in human resources that have clear guidelines and hire people that serve the purposes as much as possible with the characteristics that they were required to do the jobs. And I think your research reinforced the people that collaborated better inside particular communities, perhaps countries or units, and worked better in projects that were perhaps the same kind of collaboration in which they were used to. Okay, so if that exists, that your research is basically reinforcing or perhaps proving better the esprit de corps that I imagine the company would like to create and would like to support. Now, on the other hand, how much that helps you when this, you got so many positive results, so you can say, okay, A, B, C, D people in a company are doing the work right. But then, don't you really need a little bit of agitation and disturbance and disruption in order to really create new things, to really be provocative?
Very nice
and
point.
reinforce what you have and basically reach a plateau and just stay there.
Yep, thank you. A complex but good question. I want to go back and quote us for a moment. Let's see if I can find it. Yes, here. People were not only doing things within their common identity facets. There's a whole lot of stuff that happened across. It's just that having something in common boosted it a bit. But if you look at these numbers, you can see all three of the different columns have the majority of percentage. So to that part of your question, people were not just doing things within their comfort. They were, in fact, stepping out away from comfort. To another one of your themes, IBM is a big believer in disruptive technologies. We want to get ourselves disrupted first. If it turns out to be a useful kind of disruption, we'll tell our clients, we'll make a product around that. Social media is a wonderfully good example of that. If it's a bad disruption, well, we'd rather suffer the consequences ourselves and not do that to customers. So I think people were interested in various kinds of disruption, and some of the projects were challenging. Some of the projects in which a software organization said, well, we need hardware to do this, that was a bit of a challenge. This is not, how do I say, no one's trying to make things harder for other people, so the challenges were constructive challenges. But some of the morale projects really were not anticipated. Some of the culture projects were not anticipated. There were projects about getting all of the old exterior to the building video cameras out of mothballs and making them work again at the Almaden site. Nobody knew why that was going to be a good idea. It seemed to some people like a waste of time. But it was funded, so off they went and they did that. Disc golf doesn't obviously have a workplace relationship, but arguably it helped with morale and culture, and especially to bring the new people into the community. So executives weren't thinking that way. And our executive in particular, Dave McQueenie, was very, very interested in having new thoughts he couldn't think. So one of the old, gosh, I'm such a booster this evening. One of the old IBM adages is none of us is as smart as all of us. And I think we had people thinking that way.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, okay. But before my question, let me just quick. So, had you thought about this kind of thing where you suggest projects that others do, not you? I mean,
yeah.
and many of the type of morale projects or something could fall in that. We need a, Friday. Thank God it's Friday celebration.
We thought about it, but that hasn't happened yet.
Okay, but so my real question is, in the second study, the differences between country and the advantage for country, group, and discussion, possible control that one could do about that before I ask, say, the control, the way the person, when I look at a proposal, would it be identified where it was coming out of? I mean, there would be names associated. Would I know where and then I
There would
could
be
look-
location associated with
So there'd be a location, and then I know the individuals.
You would be able to get information about them, whether you knew them or not.
So I don't know if it's a meaningful control, but it might be interesting to suggest projects devoid of information about location or even individuals, or at least make people click to get the information about location.
Oh, very nice.
So then did people actually not even bother to look, or did they look, and how many looked, and that kind of
Okay, you're signed up. What a great idea. Thank you. We haven't done that. We should have done that. So he was first, but then you. And then we should keep our eyes on the clock and remember that dessert happens and we have to clear the building at 9, so fairly soon. Anyway, carry on.
I'm a little bit confused by your fourth result, which was that you rejected the hypothesis that people were more likely to fund the projects of people they knew. And if I remember your statistics, something like at least 40% of the funding was from people who didn't know you, which would imply that maybe 60% was from people who did know you. And the expected number of people who know you would be the average fraction of people who knew each other. And it should be way lower than 60%. So why did you reject the hypothesis?
Good. Very nicely done. In the first case, people were co-located, so we could have thought that they would have known each other. And so we were just plain surprised. I don't think we made it a formal hypothesis at that point. In the second case, it was 70% didn't know each other. And you're right, we didn't do the statistics on that. We just looked at that and said that doesn't make sense if we think that social ties are a necessary antecedent.
Yeah,
But thank you for calling me on that. I should have done it better. I'm
Yeah,
hearing you.
your group
Yep.
thing, you
Yep.
got positive, and yet 72% were in different groups. So,
I'm hearing you. Point well taken. If I'm not turning red, I should be. Good. I'm sorry, and those were my statistics. That's not Todd's fault. That was my fault.
I was just curious, in the case of the CIO project where the funds were over-allocated to the individual investors, did you find that the projects were funded much faster because people were essentially competing to spend their money before it ran out?
Oh, I don't know.
I don't know, actually. That's a very good question. No, I think actually they ran about the same duration as the other projects. The silly story is they had over-allocated because they knew how badly we had done. We only pledged, I think, 44% and spent less than that, and they didn't want to make that mistake. They annually have, or every half a year, they allocate $150,000 to innovative projects, usually on the executive picks model. So they wanted to spend that, and so they over-allocated. And toward the end of the trial period, they actually ran over their budget, and they couldn't find the off switch for 3 days. And so 2 more projects came in pseudo-funded, and then they had to apologize. But I think the time frame was roughly the same.
But they did succeed in spending over 100% of the budget.
Every last penny and then a few more. Yes.
Great,
and
thank
and
you.
the second time they ran it, they had an off switch, believe me. Yes. They were, well, in a sense, that hurts people's feelings, right? Oh, good, I'm successful on Saturday, but by Monday I find out I'm not. So they didn't want to do that to people. This is do no harm, right? So no more people at microphones. So I think it's time for people to have dessert. Thank you very much.